Hi, Ed. Good afternoon. Welcome to this session of Caffeine and Carrots. Thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be with you.
Wonderful. So for our audience, I think most of them would know you anyway. So Ed is a very prominent and popular customer success influencer and consultant. Ed has played multiple roles in his career, and we'll talk to him a little bit about that. Gained a lot of experience in this space, and is currently a principal consultant at Service Excellence Partners. Ed, without further ado, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your journey and how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I started a long time ago, 37 years ago in business. I got out of college, worked for HP, Hewlett Packard for about 12 years. Started out in sales, went into marketing, and then into operations. Left there in 99. Did a series of startups. And last dozen years or so, I've come back to technology, and I've been working in customer success and working with all kinds of different clients, from multi-billion-dollar companies to startups, working on this whole issue of customer success and customer experience.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm sure we'll have a good conversation. So, one thing I do ask a lot of our guests, and I'll ask the same of you as well, especially with your very valuable experience. What are you seeing, changing for the good in customer success, and maybe even for the bad? Is there something which is changing very rapidly last couple of years? If you could point a finger at that, what would that be?
Well, that's a great question, and I think I've told the story a few times. My experience, I started out with an electronics manufacturing company with HP, and that industry went through upheaval and change, and I'm starting to see the same thing happen in software, right? Years ago, there was in quality, there used to be a quality department. There used to be a big group of technicians at the end of a production line, and they would go and they would test and fix what was coming off the line in order to ship it to customers, right? And there was an awakening in manufacturing, say, you know what, that's not the best place to do that. It's really expensive, it's slow. Why don't we fix things upstream in the process so that we don't have to fix them downstream, right? So that was kind of an evolution. Then once they kind of got production understood and really working at a high level quality, said, well, where do these other defects come from? Oh, they're in design. We need to go work with design.
Yeah.
And where do those design defects come in? Well, we're designing features and functions that the market doesn't want. Well, we got to go work in marketing, right? So you went further and further upstream to fix problems. And the same thing is starting to happen in customer success. Before, when it really was in its infancy, it was about this function and what do we do to try to save customers? And we're at the end of the production line. Let's try to do saves.
Yeah.
And we're kind of evolving to, well, let's get in front of that. Let's be proactive, right? And so a lot of the energy is about getting in front of it and measuring it and, trying to make things better. But I think the next evolution is going to be, how do we make this preventative? How do we create the circumstances where customers would never dream of going anywhere else? Yep. And I think that's where the next shift is going to be, and it's very encouraging to see that.
No, absolutely, and I love that term you used. So very early part of my career, I worked in a refinery. So I'm a mechanical engineer by profession. So I worked in a refinery, and this is some 20 years back. So we had this concept of preventive maintenance. So you don't wait for a machine to break down. You maintain it proactively, and like you said, it was called preventive maintenance. Full circle now back, and here you're talking about accounts. So yeah, absolutely hear what you're saying. Ed, one thing we discussed when we connected last time, and I thought that was very interesting, was your sort of views around beliefs in customer success, the value system and how it all interconnects. And you had specifically used a term called the cognitive bias. And I think it resonated very well with me. I think it'll be good for our audience to also hear this a little bit from you. So what exactly and how would you define a belief in customer success, and how does it relate to day-to-day customer success operations?
Yeah, this is something that's been interesting. And when we take a step back and we think about what we're trying to do at the end of the day, we're trying to influence a decision. That's what we do in sales. That's what we're trying to do in customer success, is that what are we after? We're after that renewal. We're after that expansion. So what causes that? Well, it has to do more and more, I believe, in beliefs. It is generating beliefs about your company, about your brand, about your technology, about your solution. And when you have beliefs emerging within your accounts, individually and collectively, those beliefs influence decisions. And we see that in our everyday life, right? I mean, we see funny things going on with these conspiracy theories. We're like, where are you coming up with that, right? Beliefs are actually much stronger than facts.
Yeah.
So if we can think about how beliefs form, and then influence those beliefs, and we can influence those decision outcomes. And the more and more I think about, the more it really is all about that, is when we're in customer success, customers are trying to get from the promise to the reality. They're trying to achieve that, and they have to believe that they've achieved that. And to your point, once we have a firm belief, how does that influence us? That changes our thinking, right? We have confirmation bias. And a great example of that is, if a customer really believes in you and your brand, they believe they're getting that value from you collectively, a lot of people feel that way. Then if something happens, a hiccup of some kind, you have an outage, or you have to do a price increase, or they had a bad service experience.
Yeah.
They say, well, I get it. These things happen, no big deal. But if they don't believe that, what do they think? Well, here's just more evidence. Here we go again. This is why we never should have bought from you in the first place.
Right.
So those beliefs really influence our thinking and how we interpret new information, and it influences our repurchasing, our expansion. Everything comes from that belief structure.
Correct. No, it's very, very good point. The only other thing I'd probably add there is I think this starts off even before you have customer success playing a role. This really starts from your right from your brand messaging to your marketing messaging to your sales expectation setting and stuff like that. So instead of more of the CS handover, which gets talked about so much but means so little, if you have designed it towards the right belief systems, like you have put it very well, I think the whole thing starts flowing through seamlessly, including, of course, with CS, that yes, you now need to reinforce the belief which got sold and do justice to it potentially.
That's exactly right. And in fact, that's how our brains are wired. That's actually how they work, right? There's, if you really look at the psychology and what happens inside the brain, what we do in the sales process, whenever we buy something new, whether we're aware of it or not, subconsciously we have an expectation of the outcome. We make a decision, and whether we express it or not, we have a prospection, we have a prospective belief in what that outcome will be. And what happens is, if we don't have that expectation prior, then we can't learn anything, because how the brain learns is it compares the outcome to the expectation. And if the outcome exceeds the expectation, that's great. We get a reward for that, right? If the outcome doesn't come close to our expectation, we have a negative experience of that, and we learn from that too, right? So what happens is this is called reinforcement learning, and as we learn more and more things, then we get more confidence in our expectations, and confidence plus expectation is a belief.
Right. No, wonderful. And this reminds me, around 4 or 5 years back, there's a book I had read called Neuromarketing by a gentleman called Patrick Renoir.
Yes.
And it's very eye-opening, the old brain, new brain. And there's a term he used similar to the one which you're saying on confirmation bias, called cognitive dissonance, which really was about justifying your decision, post-purchase, and marketers, how they play to it. I think this is very similar, but we are looking at the positive angles to this rather than the negative, potential directions this could go to. So absolutely, 100%. So I think How do you then incorporate some of these structures of aligning towards beliefs, working towards a belief, and getting the key decision makers in your account to sort of align towards a common belief? Do you do it as a process? Is it the same standard process, skill training, metric tracking? How do you implement something like this?
Well, it's best to do it systematically. And I've learned, and you've probably learned as well, is that, hope is not a strategy. Luck is not a strategy. You need to make sure that you're doing something consistently and effectively. And that means you need to make it systematic. And the best way to do that, like you said, is upfront in the sales process. I do a lot of work with clients, when the deal's at the 5-yard line, to introduce your customer success manager and say, hey, Charlie, I know we've got the paperwork in procurement right now, and I want to introduce you to your new best friend. Here's your customer success manager. That's a great time because all those decision makers are still engaged. They're active. The process is still going on. You have great access to all those people. And that's a great time for a CSM to say, I'm here for you. I'm here to help you be successful, and I will not rest until that happens. Let's talk about how you define success. Have you thought about that? How would you measure that? How would you know when you're successful? Having that conversation, because again, whenever we buy something, we have that expectation, whether we're aware of it or not. And a lot of times customers don't know. I haven't thought about that yet. They haven't really articulated that. But to get them to really state that and to agree to, that's a really good way of measuring. Let's do that. And let's look at that 6 months down the road. Great, let's write that down. A lot of times a customer success manager can say, well, you're like a lot of my other customers. Here's how they do it. What do you think of that? Right. And if you can build those metrics, those proof points, if you will, from the very beginning, then you just watch for those. You facilitate those. If you know that, our users are going to see that value immediately because it makes their life so much better. There's a proof point. The manager managing all these people, they see people are getting work done much faster and easier. There's another proof point. Then the economic buyer, hey, we're much more productive. We don't have to have as many people here. We can grow with the same number of people. So there's another proof point, right? So when we capture those and measure those and keep reflecting them back, that's evidence that tells us we made a good decision. We start to believe. We start to believe that this was the right choice. This is the right company to work with. And I've gotten value and I'm going to continue to get value.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great theory, and it's very important. This discussion is very good, Ed, because it's making me ruminate a little bit, and I'm remembering a few, very related topics. There was one, and I forget where I had read this. It's probably most likely Peter Drucker, but this was about value, and whether it's a product value or a service value. Is the equation he had was its actual delivery of that product or service. So actual value plus perceived value. So your true value is equal to the actual value plus perceived value. And the belief system really aligns to the perceived value piece. And if that is really 50% of the equation, you really can swing your decision making just by working on the beliefs itself. So I think it's very, very relevant. I don't see too much of that happening, honestly, in the CS space yet, but it is something I think for people to be more aware of. So one question for you now is, obviously in theory, this we will agree to. Now, how difficult is it to put in practice, considering the resource skill sets and the mix of talent availability you have, or most organizations would have access to? Is it difficult? Can you break it up into different roles? Like we said, systematically do it because these are humans talking to humans. How do you actually handle the internal side of the human skill set?
Yeah, and there's a question of scale here too, which is if we have a human in the loop and we're paying very close attention to all these decision makers and influencers and all their little moments of proof, that's a lot of labor. That's a lot of work, right? And setting up the measurement systems to try to figure that out. And would you do this for everybody? Well, that's a good question. Maybe you just do that for your highest tier, most strategic, biggest value accounts. Can you replicate that at scale? Well, of course you can. You can do some things even completely automatically. If you have a self sign up, prompt some things up there. What are you trying to achieve? Here's some thoughts.
Yeah.
And then you could do many of those same things electronically. There are some companies out there that's what they specialize in doing, is showing that feedback, showing here's what's happening in your business, and here's how much of an impact we're making, and here's where you should go next. So it's entirely possible to do it without having humans. There's different instantiations of all of that, but it certainly can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. One, very key aspect of, how I have approached CS, as well as, some elements of this would reflect obviously in the platform we have and the components we have thereof as well, is really how do you influence the decision making of a practitioner? Mm-hmm. So there's so many moving parts. Now we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to align to beliefs, we have to track value, do this. It is not a linear equation. It is different. It's different. It can be different for different accounts, even within the same organization, and in the same customer set. It can be different for different customers, obviously different for different product lines. So it is a little bit complex. Now, what have you seen, and how do you enable your team to make better decisions as they, address customer situations, opportunities, both?
Well, I think as a manager, and understanding that is in fact true. We all learn at different rates. It's not just this nice linear way of change. Change can happen in fits and starts and bursts and things like that, as does learning. You're exposed to something, you may not really get it until you have to do something with it. And we're all at different points on the spectrum. So being flexible in that, I think, is really important. I think reading some of the signals that are going on is very helpful as well. And I know your platform does that very well, that you can extract that from the behaviors. What are we observing here? How are they ramping? How quickly are they ramping? Where are those stick points? And the more you do this, the more you talk to customers, the more you understand what they're typically seeing, the more you can help them. We're all different. All human beings are different, but at some level, we're all the same. And the thing is that we tend to cluster into various groups, right? And if we're out there examining that, learning from our customers, this is very common. These are the areas where they have some stick points. That's where you need to focus. That's where you need to pay very close attention. And I think that is always evolving and changing. And it's that curiosity, exploring it, interviewing customers, looking at behavior, learning, adjusting. That's always part of the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So with us, with the smart ops component, which is what you referred to, we do track across revenue trends, customer sentiment trends, engagement trends, adoption trends, etc. And the intent behind that is being able to proactively push some of these knowledge and learning to the human practitioner and to make the right decision. So we're saying, hey, did you know this is happening? Are you aware this is going on? Did you look at that trend? Now what you do with it can be automated, but it, for most part, needs to have a human decision point, and we are hoping that that's how they are more enabled and empowered to actually address these beliefs with the customers, instead of just doing the mundane tick mark of day-to-day activities. So anyway, it's probably a discussion again for a later date. Ed, we talked about some changes. We talked about the belief system. What are some hard learnings you have had? If you were to say we shouldn't repeat a mistake you have made or you have learned from, is there, I'm sure you have come across hard learnings across some of these organizations you work with also and worked for. Is there something which really stands out that, this is something we have learned the hard way and probably good for us to know?
Well, the one thing that I keep coming back to over and over and over again is what starts right stays right. Mm-hmm. Back to that where we started, is that if you're working upstream, most of the issues that you see downstream are created upstream. And that's really true, that those early stages of the relationship, when customers have this expectation, that is the time you have to go all in and deliver. Those early stages when they go from the promise to the reality, if that gets fumbled, you are behind the 8 ball over and over and over again. And I've seen that in every company. I've seen that there's a disconnect between sales and operations in every company. That is always true.
Yeah.
And that this part of the process is so critical. And it's because of how we're wired. That's how our brains work. So if we understand that's how the brains of our customers work, and we surge into those areas to make that right, then that fixes everything downstream, right? So there are some critical points. It's not like every moment is important, every memory is important, every transaction, every checkbox. It is not all that important. But there are a few that are absolutely mission critical. And this early stage of that belief formation, going from the promise to the reality, if you had to pick one area to work on, that's it right there. Everything else comes from it.
No, very, very well said. I think this has been a very refreshing discussion, Ed. Thank you so much for your time and all these insights. I wish we could continue the discussion. We probably will, but that probably has to be another session. We are at the top of our time mark right now. So thank you once again for joining, and I'm sure the audience will really, really love these insights you have had.
My pleasure. I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Take care.